One of the biggest questions that I think most of us have had when we heard about the incident on the set of Rust, where Alec Baldwin accidentally took the life of cinematographer Helena Hutchins, is that how did the live rounds get onto the set? Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk a little bit about how did the live rounds come to be on the set of the movie Rust? And how did one of those rounds find its way into the revolver that Alec Baldwin was holding that tragically took the life of cinematographer Helena Hutchins? There's a number of different ways in which this live round could have gotten onto the set of the movie Rust. It would start with the manufacturer. It's very possible that maybe a live round got mixed in with a batch of dummy rounds at the manufacturer. Now, there's also the chance that it could have come from the supplier. The supplier would be dealing with a lot of different types of ammunitions. And again, it's possible that a live round could have become mixed in with the dummy rounds. And last but not least, it could have come from the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. She was responsible for handling all of the ammunition and weapons on the set of this movie Rust. Now, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed would have had to get this ammunition from a supplier. But there's also a chance that she could have had ammunition left over from the one previous movie in which she worked on and carried that ammunition over with her to the set of Rust. There's been a lot of talk surrounding this case, and rumors have been swirling. And one of the rumors that's out there is that some of the crew members on this set took these firearms and loaded them with live ammunition so that they could go target practice. So there's a lot of confusion as to who was handling these weapons, how many people were handling this ammunition, and why wasn't this weapon checked and double checked before it was put into the hand of Alec Baldwin. Now, this is just my opinion, but I do believe that Alec Baldwin shares in some of this responsibility. Alec Baldwin was handed a weapon. Now, he was told that this weapon was unloaded. But as I said in my last video, anyone who knows anything about these types of weapons knows that you always double check this weapon once it's put into your hand. Even if someone tells you that the weapon is unloaded, you never take someone's word for it. You always double check the weapon just to make sure that it's not loaded. So in my opinion, when somebody hands you this type of weapon, at that point, it becomes your responsibility. And this is just my opinion. I know there's going to be, some debate about this. But in my opinion, if someone hands you this type of weapon, even if they tell you that it's not loaded, and even if you're on a movie set, you still double check that weapon. Because once you take possession of it, that weapon is your responsibility, in my opinion. Now, when law enforcement is questioning Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, they ask her, how did live rounds get onto the set? And Hannah Gutierrez-Reed responds by saying, I have no idea. Now, this is Hannah's second movie. and it's the biggest production that she had been a part of to date. So she doesn't have a lot of experience as a movie set armorer. But her father, Thel Reed, has a lot of experience, and he's well known around the movie industry. So she did have someone who helped her and guided her into this armorer position. But she wasn't very experienced. And as we talk a little bit more about how these live rounds ended up on the set, her inexperience is going to become apparent. Now, investigators didn't find one live round on the set of this movie Rust. They found multiple live rounds. And these live rounds were mixed in with dummy rounds, which creates a very, very dangerous situation. Now, these dummy rounds were all from Starline brass, and Starline brass is the go-to for dummy rounds. They're very highly regarded in the movie industry. Now, all of these live rounds were Starline brass. Now, the only problem with that is that Starline brass does not produce live ammunition. Now, when law enforcement is questioning Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and they inform her that there were live rounds found on the set, and that these live rounds were Starline brass, Hannah Gutierrez Reed is confused. And she should be, because she knows that Starline brass does not produce live ammunition. Now, these live rounds did have the Starline brass markings on them. It's 2 stars with an arc in between. And they looked exactly like the dummy rounds, with one exception: the primer. The primer on the Starline brass dummy rounds was brass, and the primer on the Starline live ammunition were silver or lead colored. So there was a difference in the appearance of the primers, and that would have been very apparent to Hannah Gutierrez Reed as an armorer. She would have been able to see this difference immediately as she was loading these firearms. Now, she didn't catch this, and it really doesn't make sense, because as an armorer, or as somebody who knows anything about ammunition or, these types of weapons, you would notice right away the difference in the primers. It would jump out at you, and it's something that you should notice pretty clearly. Now, there's also another way to check these rounds to make sure that these are dummy rounds. It's very simple. You basically shake it. And in a dummy round, when you shake the round, you're going to hear what sounds like a rattling, because they put a BB inside of the dummy rounds. So that way you can double check these rounds. When you shake them, you're going to hear that BB, and that's going to tell you that this is a dummy round. Now, live ammunition is not going to do that. When you shake a live round, you're not going to hear anything. You're not going to hear that rattling that you would hear with a dummy round. Now, these live rounds were mixed in with the dummy rounds. There was a few found in a box of dummy rounds mixed in that was labeled. The box was labeled dummy rounds. There was a few that were in some of the gun belts that the actors were wearing. And there were a few on the armorer's cart. These are live rounds. And Hannah Gutierrez apparently brought over a lot of leftover rounds from the last movie that she had worked on. So it's very possible that that's where these rounds could have come from. And some of them were actually mixed in with the dummy rounds, which that's a real bad situation, because if you're not checking every round as you're loading these into these firearms, it would make it very easy for a live round to make its way into the chamber of one of these weapons. Now, of course, there's a lot of eyes on the person who supplied the weapons and the dummy rounds to the set of Rust, and that person is Seth Kenny. Now, when Seth Kenny is questioned, he maintains that he double checks every single round before it goes out to a movie set. But he may have an idea of how live rounds could have gotten into Starline brass components. And Seth Kenny believes that this is a man named Joe Swanson. Now, Joe Swanson owns a company that supplies movie sets with dummy rounds. And Seth Kenny explains that a couple of years prior, Joe Swanson actually loaded some live rounds into some Starline brass dummy round components. So that would explain why some of these live rounds were Starline brass, because another armorer basically loaded live rounds into Starline brass components, which, in my opinion, is absolutely not the smartest thing that an armorer could do. Now, why would somebody even do that? Because Starline brass does not produce live ammunition. So why would somebody confuse the situation by loading Starline brass components with live ammunition? This is basically called a reload. And what that means is that when you have fired a round, it obviously ejects a casing. And that casing can actually be reused. That casing can be reloaded as a live round. And according to Seth Kenny, Joe Swanson had used Starline brass casings and loaded live rounds into these casings. That just doesn't make sense to me. Like, it doesn't make sense to me why somebody would take components from a company that only make dummy rounds and load live rounds into them. That, in my opinion, that's a horrible idea. Now, when Hannah Gutierrez Reed's dad is questioned, Thel Reed believes that he might have some information that could help explain how these rounds managed to get into the possession of Hannah Gutierrez Reed. Now, Thel Reed explains that the August before this incident occurred, him and Seth Kenny went out to the set of 1883, which is obviously the prequel to Yellowstone. And they went out to Texas, and Seth Kenny had some of these live rounds that were loaded into Starline brass components. So Thel Reed explains that Seth Kenny had brought an ammo box, which is a storage container for ammunition, and that he brought these out to Texas to the 1883 set so that some of these actors could, shoot live rounds so that they could kind of mimic the action of, how this weapon would kick back and the motion of this weapon firing a live round. And basically, these live rounds somehow got mixed in with the dummy rounds. Now, these individuals, these armorers, who work on movie sets and work in the movie industry are, they kind of commingle in a circle. So there's probably a lot of equipment that's being passed around and, being shared and being used on different movie sets. And somehow Seth Kenny believed that some of these reloads that Joe Swanson reloaded into Starline brass components made their way into the dummy rounds that Hannah Gutierrez Reed took with her to the set of Rust. So when Hannah Gutierrez Reed packs up all of her dummy rounds from the previous movie that she was working on and brings them to the set of Rust, it's very possible that that's where these reloads came from. Now, it sounds like there were breakdowns all along the line. But at the very end, in my opinion, even if those live rounds did make their way to the set, Hannah Gutierrez Reed should still be double checking all of this ammunition. So while she's loading these weapons with dummy rounds, she should be checking these rounds as she's loading them. So this is just my opinion, but I do believe that Hannah Gutierrez Reed would bear most of the responsibility, because any live rounds that might have made it into her bags or whatever she was storing her dummy rounds in to take to the movie set should have been discovered. Because if Hannah Gutierrez Reed was double checking her ammunition like she should have been, and maybe she was, but if she was thorough about it, she would have discovered these live rounds. Now, as I mentioned before, it wasn't just one live round. There were 7 live rounds that were found on this movie set. So, one live round is too many to overlook, obviously. These types of weapons are very dangerous, and if not handled properly, can take someone's life, just as they did with Helena Hutchins. So the armorer's job is extremely important, because the armorer is the person who is going to maintain these weapons and ensure that all of the ammunition is, that these are all dummy rounds. So as these weapons were being loaded, before they were handed to the actors, in my opinion, the armorer should have double checked all of this ammunition before anything made its way to the set. And somehow 7 live rounds managed to get through and made it onto the set of Rust. There were a number of different manufacturers and different calibers when it came to this ammunition that was in Hannah Gutierrez Reed's possession, and that could make things very confusing. And one thing that you don't want to have is you do not want to have weapons and confusion. It doesn't sound like she was very organized. It kind of sounds like she was just toting this ammunition around and it was just all mixed together. It doesn't really sound like there was a whole lot of organization. And that could cause a lot of problems, especially with these types of weapons. It's crucial to be thorough when you're dealing with these types of weapons. And it kind of sounds like Hannah Gutierrez-Reed may have been a little overwhelmed and just kind of had all of this ammunition all mixed together. It seems as though these live round primers would have caught Hannah's eye immediately. And at that point, you would need to shut everything down because you don't know how many live rounds are on this set. So if only one live round is discovered on this set, it would seem as though you would need to shut everything down until every single round was double checked. Now, what about the responsibility with Alec Baldwin? Again, this goes back to what I said. When somebody hands you a firearm, you double check that weapon. And in my opinion, even though Alec Baldwin is the star of the show, and he's not an armorer, he's an actor, but even though he was told that this weapon was cold, that it was unloaded, in my opinion, when he took possession of that weapon, it became his responsibility to double check to make sure that that weapon was safe. So it's a breakdown. It's a breakdown among a number of people, in my opinion. Now, in my opinion, the armorer should have ensured that all of these dummy rounds were just that, dummy rounds, and should have been able to catch any live rounds that might have made their way onto this set, which is a huge no-no. You just never have live ammunition on a movie set because these are the types of things that can happen. Accidents happen. Now, do I believe that anyone on the set of this movie Rust had any intentions of committing a crime that day? I don't. But I do believe that people were careless and neglectful of their responsibilities. And because of that, it cost Helena Hutchins her life. These weapons are serious and they're dangerous. And they have to be handled with respect. And there was a breakdown. And apparently someone didn't do their job that day. And it cost somebody the ultimate price. So we're going to begin talking a little bit about a lot of the details that are involved in this case. There's a lot of little details that play into this case. And there's a lot of characters in this story. So we're going to talk about all that. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. And if you like my video, please like and subscribe to my channel. I really do appreciate it. We'll see you next time.